Nigel was scrolling through job listings as usual. None of the jobs seemed to fit him. For the second month in a row, he found himself sidelined, caught in a downsizing wave. The office where he worked was simply shut down due to redundancy. With a background in biology, he couldn't find a suitable vacancy. Tired of fruitless searches, he considered any options, including becoming a foot courier or a security guard. Slumping tiredly in his computer chair, he leaned back, clasped his hands behind his head, stretched his legs, and stared at the ceiling. Another month of this, and he'd run out of money. He got up, paced the room, needing to gather his thoughts, brewed some tea, and returned to the computer to continue his job search. Sure, there were plenty of vacancies, but nothing appealed to him. He wanted to interact with people as little as possible. Better yet, not see them at all. He'd always been unsociable since childhood, and then his gaze stopped at a job listing. Rotation work, he clicked on the ad. No education required, work in the north. Yes, the promised salary was quite good on a month-to-month schedule. Without much thought, he dialed the number and called. After a brief conversation, he started preparing for an interview. He returned home in good spirits, completely satisfied with the new job opportunity. A month at some station and a month at home. All he had to do was check in twice a day via the stationary radio station, with the company covering the travel expenses. According to the station chief, there was plenty of provisions stocked at the station, enough for a month. And in case of an emergency, there was always radio communication, just a matter of sending a message. Help would arrive soon enough, considering the nearest city was only 40 kilometers away. The previous caretaker had resigned just a week ago, leaving behind a vast library. So, for Kit, a big literature enthusiast, there wouldn't be any boredom, and everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. He sipped his hot sweet tea and smiled. The departure was planned for tomorrow evening. It wouldn't be a big deal if he spent Christmas alone. He had been shaking in the train for almost 3 days, thinking that when he got off, he would still feel the train's rhythm rocking him, but it didn't happen. At the station, Kit met a gloomy and taciturn bearded man, a typical northerner. They spent the whole journey in silence. The reception at the station was warmer, with the temporary replacement, Nigel, a linguist by education, chattering incessantly while packing up, briefing Kit about the station. The cheerful lad had only worked for 4 days, quickly explaining what was where. It turned out that the station had 2 floors, or rather, a floor and a basement of the same size. Upstairs was the sleeping quarters and the radio station. Downstairs were piles of provisions and generators with fuel. When Nigel asked if Kit knew how to use the generator, for some reason he lied and nodded in agreement. In reality, he had no idea how to approach that gasoline contraption. Kit, there might be a storm soon, and sometimes there are communication outages. If there are problems at the station, start up the generators, and everything should stay lit. Also, if the blizzard picks up, don't go out. It'll snow you in like it did the previous caretaker. Nigel chattered away while packing his suitcase. What do you mean snowed in? Kit asked, surprised. Didn't they tell you about Andrew? During a blizzard, he went out somewhere and never came back. The guys came, but he wasn't there, except for his outerwear. Everything was in place. Maybe he decided to go to the city, but it's like 40 kilometers through the snow. Can you imagine what it's like? So, if there are power problems, just start the generator. Get in touch and wait for help. Well, stuff happens, I replied. The guy said goodbye and, grabbing his massive suitcase, hurried out. A minute later, Kit was left alone. The news about the missing watchman bothered him. Who in their right mind would think to go to the city 40 kilometers away in a blizzard? And why did the management lie to him? Probably didn't want to scare off a potential employee. And also, it's a gas thing. Why did I just lie that I know how to use the generator? Expected and indeed, as usual. In the evening, he got in touch, and watching the snowfall intensify, he immersed himself in reading. He chose a fantastic story by John Campbell Jr. Who goes there? which was made into the movie The Thing. The events unfolded at an Arctic base amid endless snow, which enhanced the immersion. At times, he glanced at the small window and watched the chaotic flight of snowflakes. The wind seemed to mournfully howl, intensifying the blizzard outside the window. Watching this, it got cold even in the warm station, which Kit had dubbed a bunker for himself. Perhaps a blizzard or storm really was imminent. The realization of this made him uncomfortable. Cooking was supposed to be done on a small stove. There were indeed quite a few supplies, but they were not diverse. Several crates of canned goods, a couple of bags of grains and pasta, and a huge box of vegetables. Bread was delivered every 3 days, and of course, there was an abundance of black tea and sugar, an extremely necessary product in the north. Kit also found a small radio receiver, but unfortunately, it didn't catch any stations. It emitted only an annoying hiss. Maybe some kind of antenna needed to be constructed, but Kit was far from all technical gadgets. The only exception was the stationary radio station. Long ago in his youth, he had learned to use it by chance, and finally, this skill came in handy. The blizzard intensified. For 2 days, Kit consistently got in touch in the morning and evening, and at night the raging snowstorm turned into a deadly blizzard. The wind whirled around the snow dunes, driving the dreadful snow, a veil of impenetrable darkness dancing chaotically outside the window. Besides its icy dances, it was impossible to see anything, and when Kit approached the radio station during the evening broadcast, the answer was silence. Grave silence, as cold as the blizzard outside. The connection was cut off. The man descended to the negative floor and stood in front of the generator, searching for instructions. Obviously, they were not there. It suddenly dawned on him what the connection between the power inside the station and the radio communication could be. None, most likely, problems on the line. Probably, Yegor meant if the blizzard cut the wires or knocked out the power, that's why the generator was needed. Kit realized he had not been paying attention to the replacement, but there was nothing to worry about. No connection. The main thing was electricity. The blizzard would stop, and there would be the broadcast. Especially today, they were supposed to bring bread, but the blizzard only intensified, and they didn't bring any bread. Getting used to his body, Kit read his book with absorption, occasionally approaching the radio station and futilely trying to establish contact. Evening fell, followed by night, and then a strange sound reached the man's ears amid the monotonous and deadly howling of the blizzard. Dimly, barely perceptibly, the crunch of snow was heard, as if someone was walking next to the station, delicately behind the wall. But that's impossible. The walls are too thick, and the fearful cries of the blizzard drown everything out. Moreover, no one would go outside in such a blizzard. Maybe he was too deeply immersed in the story. Kit put the book aside, leaving only the dim light of the night lamp, and went to sleep. He was almost engulfed in the sweet embrace of sleep when he heard a quiet knock. Muffled knocks on the wall. Someone timidly tapped on the concrete bunker, and this knock was heard right above his bed. Kit jumped up, but the sound immediately stopped. Only the cry of the icy blizzard disturbed the silence. He definitely reread, it all seemed to him. After drinking tea, he, looking through the window at the frenzy of snow, lay back in bed, and sleep instantly engulfed him. By morning, the blizzard subsided, but the connection didn't improve. I guess everyone is worried that the watchman isn't getting in touch, and as soon as the blizzard subsides, they will come to help him, especially since the bread ran out today. He only had pasta with stew to eat. He decided not to read the science fiction story anymore. Enough of that mind game. The snow warrior pressed, reminding of torture, listening only to it. You can easily go crazy. Maybe that's why the previous watchman left for the city. To pass the time, he flipped through Dahl's explanatory dictionary and pondered what else he could cook from the meager variety of products. Suffering from idleness, he was tired, as if he had worked a shift at the factory. By the 9th hour, he began to feel sleepy, but when he finished his tea and was about to go to bed, the door handle rattled with noise. Someone uninvited, without knocking, decided to come in. Another jerk, but the locked lock prevented the door from opening. Kit screamed in fright and then jumped up, loudly shouting, "Who's there?" But instead of an answer, he heard only the cry of the blizzard. The handle stopped trembling. Kit asked several times more, but the answer remained the same, grave silence. Hearing the howl of the snowy wind, trembling with excitement, the man approached the door and asked several times if anyone was there, except for the blizzard, but he heard nothing. He was not eager to go outside or open the doors. Nigel clearly indicated to him, "If something happens, sit and wait for help." Kit decided to follow this instruction. Still not getting an answer, the man, leaving the light on, went to sleep. Through his sleep, he heard the crunch of snow, but as soon as he got up from the bed, the sound immediately disappeared. Kit decided that his brain, finding itself in an unfamiliar environment, was playing evil tricks on him, distorting the howl of the blizzard into a different sound. Waking up early in the morning, even before the full sunrise, and in these twilight hours looking out the window, he noticed changes in the familiar surroundings. He couldn't understand what was wrong for a long time, and only after 10 minutes did he realize that there was no light coming from the entrance to the substation. The floodlight was not shining. Waiting for dawn, Kit opened the doors and, stepping out, stood rooted to the spot. Someone had broken the floodlight lamp at night, but bypassing a few seconds of his surprise, his amazement intensified, turning into mild shock. Near the station's threshold, 3 tracks barely discernible through the snow stood out. One clearly caught his eye, the imprint of a bare human foot. But that simply can't be. The psychologist couldn't believe his eyes. How could someone walk barefoot in such a blizzard? The man quickly shut the door and, feeling uneasy, began pacing the ground floor. The radio communication remained down. After finally getting a grip on his emotions, Keith replaced the lamp in the spotlight, struggling in the blizzard, his hands trembling as he constantly glanced over his shoulder, expecting an unwelcome visitor. He was growing less fond of his new workplace by the moment. As evening approached, his heart filled with growing apprehension. He drank tea, clutching the mug with both hands. Watching outside, Keith couldn't bring himself to read or sleep. Everything irritated and unnerved him, especially this damned blizzard that showed no sign of abating. Perhaps he wasn't as terrific a people as he thought. He would gladly converse with someone or watch TV at this moment. His thoughts were interrupted by the fleeting sight of a pale silhouette a dozen meters from the station. Startled, he cried out, and as he jumped from his chair, he dropped the mug from his hands. The sweet tea formed a black puddle on the white tablecloth. Though Keith only glimpsed the figure for a couple of seconds, it was enough. Incredibly pale, like a corpse, and half naked, the figure moved swiftly, hunched forward. This figure wasn't thin, but rather stocky, and the most frightening thing, the stranger was silent and almost naked, as if something living didn't feel such deadly cold and icy wind. Keith remembered the old legend of snow ghosts, and now the cold settled in his soul. He hunched his head and slowly sat on the bed. A knock on the door, and the man screamed in fear. Then another knock, and the handle moved. The man shouted incoherently, trying to threaten the uninvited and terrifying guest, but it was futile. The snow ghost pounded on the door and rattled the handle, trying to enter but bypassing it. The man spent the night in a fetal position, feeling helpless and doomed. The blizzard raged on, communication was not restored, help couldn't come. Most likely the road was blocked by snow, and his only weapon was a signal pistol with just a few rounds, which he only remembered now. The stress from the blizzard overwhelmed him, and he fell asleep closer to dawn. He slept through the entire day, not feeling like eating, with no communication or help in sight, but it seemed the blizzard began to subside, not significantly. It just wasn't as terrifying anymore. He only ate once during the day, warmed up canned fish without bread. He went to bed early at 8 p.m., only to wake up at night with a heavy sense of something amiss. Keith turned his gaze to the window, and fear gripped him. He was being stared at by something utterly bald, pale, with dark eyes that seemed covered in black smoke. And that something was watching Keith, squatting down, so only its head was visible, down to the bridge of its nose. Upon noticing the gaze, the ghost immediately vanished, but reappeared moments later with heavy blows. The pale phantom pounded forcefully on the door, trying to break in. Keith screamed in fear, threatening the uninvited guest. He heard the sound of a broken lamp, and the spotlight went out, and the blows continued. The man endured the fear, and rushing to the cabinet with the rocket launcher, armed himself with it. The mayhem continued for about 5 minutes. The creature was trying to break into the station, while the man held the signal pistol, and the blizzard swept the only road with snow. The blows ceased, and there was the crunch of snow. Then the light went out. Keith sat back on the bed and placed the rocket launcher nearby. Again, he heard only the icy lament, the devastating blizzard. He hadn't noticed when he fell asleep. He woke up from the freezing cold of the lower floor. It was freezing, without light. The heaters weren't working, and neither was the communication. Armed with the signal pistol, Keith, terrified to the core, opened the doors and stepped outside. The blizzard was indeed subsiding. It wasn't a solid white wall anymore, just snow blowing around. He sometimes got stuck in drifts, circumvented the station, and froze, stopping in front of the control panel. The uninvited guest had severed the wire leading from the distributor to the station, which was a huge relief for Keith, as they had been taught basic electrical work in school, and although he barely passed it, he knew what to do in this situation. Turning off the circuit breaker, he clumsily went back to the station, halfway stopping as a pale silhouette stood several dozen meters away, seemingly unaffected by the snowstorm but not rushing to attack, as if wary or waiting. "Leave me alone," Keith shouted loudly, pointing the signal pistol at the snow ghost. He was so tired and frozen that the fear of the unknown took a back seat. Returning to the station, the man managed to find some tools and went back outside to fix the breakage. With trembling and frozen hands, he managed to do it somehow. All this time, something had been watching him, for reasons known only to itself. It didn't rush to attack, as if mocking or tormenting its victim with the cold. Upon returning, the former biologist first checked the heaters, which were working. But not expecting much, he sat down at the radio station, and a miracle happened. Despite strong interference, he received a response, but the conversation was greatly hindered. "Keith, nothing was working here. Can you hear me? Someone will come to you soon, due to snow difficulties. How are you holding up?" "I haven't heard a damn thing," the man shouted, his emotions raw. "Everything cuts off. I can't hear a damn thing." "I'm telling you, the road's blocked by snow. They'll come to you tomorrow. Just don't." And the connection cut off again. All that was left was to wait. Keith, never parting with his signal pistol, went about his usual business, reading, preparing food, and drinking tea. He waited for the next day, but to get there, he had to survive the night, and that something knew very well how to cut wires. Closer to midnight, the lights went out again, the wires were cut again, and moments later, an icy gust burst into the room, smashing the window and filling the still partially heated station. Keith, deciding he'd had enough, took the signal pistol in hand, slowly opened the door, and stepped outside. "I don't see the ghost," Keith said, looking around and reacting to any sound. He paced back and forth, armed, but didn't notice how behind him, a pale figure instantly emerged from the snow, and with a sharp leap knocked the man down from surprise and pain. Keith screamed and fell a few meters, luckily not dropping the pistol. The stocky pale figure abruptly turned. Sensing its sharp, elongated fangs, it prepared for another leap. Instinctively, the man closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. He shot, and Keith opened his eyes. He hit the creature right in the mouth. It spun like a top, and after a few seconds, it fell dead, spraying fireworks from its mouth. Somewhere in the city, people were launching fireworks in the background, celebrating Christmas. Keith, exhausted, smiled and slowly got up. Just in case, he reloaded the rocket launcher, but the ghost or rather the mutant, showed no signs of life. The man tried to fix the brake, but this time he couldn't. Dismissing it, he went back into the station to wait for morning. By morning, the blizzard had finally subsided, and from the first rays of the sun, 3 emergency workers arrived on snowmobiles. A policeman and a medic were not greeted by anyone. Holding the mutant's body, the policeman asked the other 2 to search the station for the keeper. The room was snowed in and freezing cold. Keith was found lying on the bed, buried in blankets and clothes, trying to stay warm. He had simply shut down. Cold but alive, he first grabbed the signal pistol and then joyfully and hysterically burst into tears, all the horror left behind. They briefed him, providing assistance. It turned out that due to the blizzard, there was a break at the base, but due to some absurdity or someone's negligence, the backup power supply was not working. The issues were only resolved after a few days, and they immediately tried to establish communication from the very first day. Keith began to worry, but since the only road was blocked by snow, they couldn't come to him. They were saved by modern northern horses, snowmobiles. After warming up with strong coffee from a thermos, Keith agreed to go to the city to talk to local authorities. All 4 got on snowmobiles and left the outskirts of the substation, and the pale body of the creature remained lying on the blood-stained snow. In the city, they persuaded him to stay, and he reluctantly agreed. A week later, Keith returned to work, and also after 6 days with Andrew, with whom he began to communicate not only on work duties to alleviate the boredom, he learned, "Listen, Keith, the creature you shot, well, how to put it correctly, the mutant. The data aren't confirmed, but I'll tell you what I know, as a friend, or rather, heard. Here in the offices, they used to mine uranium. The mines are kind of mothballed now, and while they're unnecessary, they supposedly plan to restart development." Andrew fell silent for a couple of seconds and then continued. "They recently found this creature's lair. It lived about 10 kilometers from the station. And guess what it hunted? Any living beings. So, this creature, of unknown origin, as the smart guys here say, exclusively fed on meat. They found marten, fox, and all sorts of northern wildlife skeletons in its cave. But the most interesting thing is that they discovered 3 human skeletons, including the remains of the former keeper. He didn't just disappear or go crazy. Apparently, the mutant lured him and ate him. Why it dragged corpses there, who knows, maybe to feed there. And also, it's not susceptible to cold, apparently. But you know that yourself, you've seen how the blizzard is nothing to it. But the main mystery, how did this beast end up there? They don't just appear out of nowhere. Maybe it was some kind of child with deviations, that is, one of us, but only the mutation took over. Andrew could only say, "Keith, you should stay here to work with us at the station. You won't find a job as a biologist anymore." "All right," Keith said with a sigh. "I hope the next blizzard there won't cut off the wires, and if they do, they'll fix them quickly." "Well, what about you?" Andrew said kindly. "You've already learned to use the generator. They gave you a pistol. And remember, switch the radio to a different modulation. You were listening on AM. You need FM. That's where all the radio stations are," Andrew said, coming up with a nickname for the former biologist.